You're 5 years old, standing on a stool at the kitchen counter, barely tall enough to see over the edge. Your grandmother's hands are dusted with flour as she teaches you to make pancakes from scratch. The butter sizzles in the pan, and she lets you pour the batter yourself, watching as it spreads into an imperfect circle. Tiny bubbles appear across the surface, and she shows you exactly when to flip. The pancake lands perfectly, golden brown, and you feel proud that this small morning magic is now something you can do too. Welcome back to Midnight Deep Dive. If you're new here, welcome to our cozy corner of the internet where we explore fascinating stories designed to ease you gently into sleep. Tonight, we're exploring something so ordinary we rarely think about it. Breakfast. The meal that starts our day, connects us to thousands of years of human history, and surprisingly, didn't always exist the way we know it now. So settle in, find that comfortable spot, and let's wander together through the cozy, complicated, surprisingly dramatic history of breakfast. Imagine the world as it was 300,000 years ago. Our early human ancestors wake as the sun begins to paint the horizon in shades of amber and rose. There's no alarm clock, no snooze button, no rushing to get ready. They wake because light has returned to the world, because their bodies tell them it's time, because survival requires alertness from the moment consciousness returns. And one of the first things they do, like us, is think about food. But here's something fascinating. For most of human existence, there was no such thing as breakfast as a distinct meal. Early humans were opportunistic eaters, consuming food whenever it was available rather than at set times. If you woke up and there were leftover berries from yesterday's foraging, you ate them. If you were near water and could catch fish at dawn, that became your morning meal. The idea of specific breakfast foods would have been completely alien to them. Archaeological evidence gives us glimpses into what these morning meals might have looked like. Analysis of ancient teeth and fossilized food remains suggests our ancestors ate a remarkably varied diet. Nuts and seeds, wild fruits, roots and tubers, occasional meat from successful hunts, insects, eggs when they could find them. The morning meal was simply food. Whatever was available, whatever was safe to eat, whatever would provide energy for the day's activities. The concept of cooking, which emerged somewhere between 1.8 million and 400,000 years ago, depending on which evidence you trust, fundamentally changed human morning routines. Fire meant that previously inedible or difficult to digest foods could be softened and made safe. Grains, which would become so central to breakfast culture, became viable food sources only after humans learned to process and cook them. That bowl of oatmeal you might eat for breakfast represents a culinary breakthrough that took thousands of years to develop. Hunter-gatherer societies, whose lifestyles we can study through modern groups that maintained traditional practices into recent history, show us something interesting about early morning eating patterns. Many hunter-gatherer groups didn't emphasize eating immediately upon waking. They might drink water, perhaps chew on something small, but the first substantial meal often came later in the morning after initial activities were completed. The urgent need to eat breakfast first thing wasn't universal. It was contextual, depending on food availability, the day's planned activities, and cultural practices. The agricultural revolution, beginning around 10,000 BCE, changed everything about how humans ate, including their morning meals. When humans began cultivating crops and domesticating animals, food became more predictable, more controllable. You could store grain, milk animals in the morning, collect eggs from birds you domesticated. For the first time in human history, you could plan what you'd eat at dawn rather than hoping you'd find something. Ancient civilizations developed surprisingly sophisticated approaches to morning meals. In ancient Egypt, workers building the pyramids received rations that often included bread and beer. Yes, beer for breakfast was not only acceptable but standard, though the beer was thicker, more nutritious, and less alcoholic than modern versions. These weren't leisure meals, but fuel for hard labor, practical sustenance to power the monumental construction projects that still inspire awe today. The ancient Greeks had a meal called akritisma, typically consisting of bread dipped in wine, sometimes with figs or olives. It was light, taken shortly after waking, and not considered particularly important. The Romans similarly had a morning meal called intaculum, which might include bread, cheese, olives, and left over from the previous night. These meals were functional, not ceremonial. Quick energy before the day's real activities began. What's particularly interesting is that in many ancient cultures, the morning meal was the least important meal of the day. The Romans, Greeks, and Egyptians all placed greater emphasis on their midday or evening meals. Breakfast was almost apologetic, a minor necessity before getting on with important matters. This stands in stark contrast to the modern Western notion that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, a belief we'll explore later. Ancient China developed morning food traditions that persist in modified forms today. Congee, a rice porridge, has been eaten for breakfast in China for at least 4,000 years. It was easy to digest, could be made with minimal fuel, and could stretch limited rice supplies to feed many people. The practice of eating warm, soft foods in the morning, believed to be gentler on the stomach after sleep, influenced Asian breakfast traditions across cultures and centuries. The class divisions in morning meals became apparent early in civilization. Wealthy Romans might have elaborate intaculum with multiple courses, while slaves and poor workers might have only bread and water. This pattern repeated across cultures. Those with resources could afford varied, interesting morning meals, while those without ate whatever cheap food would provide basic energy. Breakfast, from the very beginning of recognizable breakfast culture, was a marker of social status. Religious practices began influencing morning meals in interesting ways. Many religions developed fasting traditions that dictated what could or couldn't be eaten before certain prayers or at certain times. The Jewish tradition of breaking the nightly fast with a blessing over bread, the Islamic tradition of eating dates after the pre-dawn meal during Ramadan, Christian monastic communities, eating their first meal after morning prayers. These religious frameworks gave breakfast spiritual significance beyond mere nutrition. The connection between morning and hope, between dawn and new beginnings, made the first meal of the day symbolically important even when it wasn't practically elaborate. Breaking the darkness of night, breaking the fast of sleep, breaking into a new day. The language itself suggests that morning eating was about transition, about marking the passage from rest to activity, from darkness to light. What emerges from this ancient history is a picture of breakfast as fundamentally flexible, shaped by environment, resources, labor demands, and cultural beliefs, rather than by any universal human need to eat specific foods at specific times. Our ancestors were pragmatic. They ate what worked when it worked, and didn't particularly worry about whether they were doing breakfast correctly. That certainty about the right way to eat breakfast would come much later, bringing with it both benefits and unnecessary anxieties about the meal that starts our day. As we move into medieval Europe, breakfast becomes less a practical necessity and more a moral question. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, developed a peculiar relationship with morning meals that mixed religious anxiety, class consciousness, and genuine concerns about health and productivity. For much of the medieval period, breakfast was seen with suspicion, even moral condemnation, in ways that seem almost comical from our modern perspective. The medieval Catholic Church taught that gluttony was a deadly sin, and eating more than once a day was often considered gluttonous, unless you had specific reasons for needing extra sustenance. Monks and clergy typically ate only one main meal per day, usually after midday prayers. Breaking your fast earlier than necessary suggested weakness of character, lack of discipline, or dangerous preoccupation with physical rather than spiritual matters. In the strictest interpretations, eating breakfast was literally sinful, an indulgence that prioritized the body over the soul. But practical reality, as it so often does, complicated these religious ideals. People who performed hard physical labor, farmers, laborers, soldiers, genuinely needed morning food to function effectively. Medieval authorities recognized this, creating exceptions to breakfast prohibitions for workers, children, the sick, and the elderly. You could eat breakfast if your circumstances justified it, but there was always an apologetic quality to it, a sense that you were taking advantage of an exception rather than doing something entirely acceptable. The class dynamics of medieval breakfast are particularly fascinating. The nobility and wealthy merchants often ate what they called a dinner in late morning or midday, ignoring breakfast entirely or having only something very light. This wasn't merely following religious teaching. It was a status symbol. If you could afford to skip breakfast, if your life didn't require manual labor, you demonstrated your elevated social position through not eating in the morning. Meanwhile, peasants and workers typically ate a simple morning meal despite religious disapproval. Because working in fields from dawn until midday without food was simply impractical. This meal might consist of bread, perhaps some cheese or ale, maybe porridge if they had grain available. It wasn't elaborate or enjoyable. It was fuel, consumed quickly before heading out to whatever labor occupied the day. The wealthy could afford to be virtuous about breakfast. The poor couldn't afford such luxury. The types of food available for medieval breakfast depended entirely on social class and geography. Bread was nearly universal, made from wheat for the wealthy, from rye or barley for the poor, sometimes from whatever grains could be obtained during lean times. Ale was common at breakfast across all classes, as water was often unsafe to drink, and ale provided calories as well as hydration. The brewing process made it safer than plain water while adding nutritional value. Porridge, made from whatever grains were available, appeared frequently at medieval morning tables. Oat porridge in Scotland and northern regions, wheat porridge further south, sometimes flavored with honey if available, more often just salted. This wasn't the refined oatmeal we know today. It was thick, sometimes gluey, often prepared the night before and reheated in the morning. It was sustaining rather than appetizing, though medieval people probably didn't expect their breakfast to be particularly enjoyable anyway. Cheese appeared at breakfast when available, providing protein and fat in forms that could be stored without refrigeration. Eggs, when chickens were kept, might be boiled or scrambled over the morning fire. Smoked or salted fish provided protein for those near water sources or trade routes. Fruits, when in season, might supplement the meal, though these were often preserved through drying or pickling to last through winter months. The medieval attitude toward breakfast began shifting in the later medieval period, particularly among the wealthy. Medical texts from the 13th and 14th centuries started arguing that breakfast might actually be healthy, especially for certain constitutions. The idea emerged that morning food could balance the humors, prepare the stomach for digestion, and provide energy for mental as well as physical work. This medicalization of breakfast helped make it more acceptable among educated classes who could claim health justifications for their morning meals. The medieval manor house began developing breakfast traditions that would influence later practices. While the lord might not eat breakfast, household servants and workers would be fed in the morning. Bread, ale, perhaps some pottage or cold meats from previous meals. These communal feedings created social structures around morning meals that emphasized hierarchy and obligation. The lord provided breakfast to maintain his workforce. Workers received it as part of their compensation. Monasteries and convents developed their own breakfast practices within religious restrictions. While monks might not eat a formal morning meal, they might be allowed a small refreshment called a mixtum after early morning prayers, perhaps bread and weak ale or wine. Some monastic orders were stricter than others, with some prohibiting any morning food and others allowing light meals for brothers engaged in particularly taxing labor. The concept of breaking your fast became linguistically embedded during this period. The Old English word morgenmeat, morning food, gradually gave way to phrases about breaking the nighttime fast, eventually condensing into the word breakfast itself. This linguistic shift reflected changing attitudes, moving from thinking about morning eating as a specific meal type to thinking about it as ending the fasting period that naturally occurred during sleep. By the late medieval period, breakfast was becoming more socially acceptable across classes, though it retained some lingering associations with weakness or indulgence. The Protestant Reformation would later challenge Catholic teachings about food and fasting, contributing to breakfast's growing respectability. But the medieval period established patterns that would persist. The idea that breakfast requires justification, that morning eating reflects character and discipline, that there are right and wrong ways to approach the day's first meal. What's striking about the medieval breakfast story is how much anxiety surrounded something as simple as eating in the morning. This wasn't just about food. It was about virtue, status, discipline, and one's relationship with the divine. The medieval world couldn't just eat breakfast. It had to morally account for eating breakfast. This excessive concern about the rightness of breakfast eating, interestingly enough, never quite went away. We still debate whether breakfast is essential or optional, healthy or harmful, necessary or indulgent. Still asking, in our modern way, whether we're doing breakfast correctly. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how goods were manufactured or how cities grew. It fundamentally transformed when, where, and what people ate for breakfast. As factories replaced farms as primary employers, as clock time replaced sun time for organizing daily life, breakfast evolved from an optional, guilt-laden meal into a necessary, structured ritual. This transformation happened relatively quickly in historical terms, spanning roughly from the late 18th through the 19th century, and its effects still shape how we think about breakfast today. Before industrialization, most people worked in or near their homes, typically in agricultural or craft settings. They could eat whenever it made sense for their work. A farmer might eat after completing early morning chores. A craftsperson might pause for food when reaching a natural break in work. Time was flexible, organic, determined by task completion rather than clock watching. Breakfast could be leisurely or skipped entirely, depending on the day's demands. Factory work destroyed this flexibility. Workers had to arrive at specific times, work through defined shifts, and take breaks when scheduled rather than when hungry. The factory whistle didn't care whether you'd eaten breakfast. This created a practical problem. Workers needed to eat before leaving home because they wouldn't have another opportunity for hours. Breakfast shifted from optional to essential, from flexible to scheduled. You ate in the morning because that's when you had time, not because tradition or religion dictated it. The typical factory worker's breakfast in early industrial Britain or America was hardly appetizing by modern standards. Bread, sometimes toasted over the stove, perhaps with a bit of butter or lard if available. Tea or coffee, often weak, maybe porridge if there was time to prepare it. This was fuel, consumed quickly in cramped housing before the walk to the factory. The romance of breakfast as a pleasant meal hadn't yet emerged. It was still primarily functional, about getting calories before a long shift of physical labor. But something interesting happened as the Industrial Revolution progressed and created a middle class with more resources and slightly more leisure. This new middle class, anxious to distinguish itself from working-class origins, began developing elaborate breakfast traditions. The Victorian breakfast, particularly in Britain, became almost absurdly elaborate among those who could afford it. Multiple courses, hot dishes, cold meats, various breads, preserves, eggs prepared multiple ways. These breakfasts were statements of prosperity and refinement. The Victorian middle-class breakfast might include porridge or gruel as a first course, followed by fish kippers, smoked haddock. Then a meat course, bacon, sausages, kidneys, eggs prepared to preference, toast with butter and marmalade, and tea or coffee. This wasn't a quick meal grabbed before work. It was a leisurely affair that demonstrated you had both the money to afford such variety and the time to consume it properly. The working class was eating bread and weak tea. The middle class was performing affluence through breakfast. Hotels and restaurants began offering breakfast service during this period, creating new social spaces around morning meals. The railway hotel breakfast became a distinctive phenomenon. Travelers could stop at grand hotel dining rooms along railway routes and be served substantial breakfasts that showcased regional specialties and modern conveniences. These hotels helped standardize breakfast expectations and spread breakfast culture across geographic regions. The technology of breakfast evolved rapidly during the Industrial Revolution. Cast iron stoves replaced open hearths, making morning cooking more controlled and efficient. Tea kettles, toasters, coffee pots. These specialized breakfast implements emerged as manufactured consumer goods. The kitchen itself was being redesigned around new ideas about efficiency and separate meal types, with breakfast requiring its own equipment and preparation rituals. Labor movements recognized breakfast's importance, incorporating meal breaks and adequate wages to afford proper food into their demands. The notion that workers deserved time and resources for proper breakfast became part of broader arguments about human dignity and working conditions. Breakfast became politicized. Adequate morning meals were markers of basic welfare, and employers who didn't provide time or wages for workers to eat properly were seen as exploitative. Medical and nutritional thinking during this period increasingly endorsed breakfast as healthful and necessary. Doctors began arguing that breakfast provided essential energy for mental and physical work, that skipping breakfast led to reduced productivity and increased illness. This medical endorsement helped overcome lingering religious concerns about morning eating while creating new anxieties about eating breakfast correctly. Now, you weren't just morally suspect for skipping breakfast. You were potentially damaging your health. The rise of food preservation and transportation technologies expanded breakfast possibilities. Refrigeration, canning, improved mills, and food processing. These innovations meant that a wider variety of foods could appear at breakfast tables. Tropical fruits, fresh milk, refined sugars. Items that would have been luxuries became increasingly accessible to middle-class households. Breakfast became an opportunity to display not just wealth but modernity, showing that you had access to the latest food technologies. Women's roles were fundamentally reshaped by these breakfast expectations. Middle-class wives were expected to oversee breakfast preparation and service, demonstrating their household management skills through properly executed morning meals. This created additional domestic labor precisely as other household tasks were being simplified by technology. The angel in the house needed to produce flawless breakfasts, adding to the extensive list of expectations placed on middle-class women. Breakfast for children became a particular concern during the industrial period. As childhood was increasingly recognized as a distinct life stage requiring special care, proper feeding of children at breakfast became another marker of good parenting. Schools began providing breakfast for poor children, recognizing that hungry students couldn't learn effectively. Breakfast moved from private family concern to public welfare issue. By the late 19th century, breakfast had been thoroughly transformed. What had been optional, guilt-inducing, or purely functional had become essential, morally endorsed, socially significant. The proper breakfast was elaborate for those who could afford it, substantial for workers, and universally recognized as necessary for health and productivity. The stage was set for breakfast to become big business, which is exactly what happened when enterprising individuals recognized that morning meals represented commercial opportunities. The story of breakfast cereal is stranger and more fascinating than you might expect. It involves religious zealots, bitter rivalries, accidental inventions, marketing genius, and a fundamentally weird moment in American history when reformers became convinced that the right breakfast food could cure everything from indigestion to moral decay. This isn't just about food. It's about how breakfast became industrialized, commercialized, and transformed into something that would have been completely unrecognizable to anyone eating breakfast just a generation earlier. Our story begins in Battle Creek, Michigan, in the late 19th century, at a health sanitarium run by Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. Kellogg was a Seventh-day Adventist who believed that rich, meat-heavy diets caused various physical and moral ailments. He advocated for plain, bland, whole-grain foods that would, in his view, promote health while suppressing sinful urges. At his sanitarium, wealthy patients came to receive treatments that included cold baths, exercise, and strictly controlled diets featuring large amounts of whole grains. Kellogg and his brother Will Keith Kellogg were experimenting with grain-based foods that would be easy to digest and align with John Harvey's unusual health theories. In 1894, they were trying to create a digestible bread substitute by boiling wheat. They accidentally left a batch of boiled wheat sitting out too long, and when they tried to roll it anyway, instead of forming a sheet, each grain emerged as a separate flake. These flakes, when baked, became crispy and surprisingly palatable. The Kellogg brothers had accidentally invented wheat flakes. They began serving these flakes to sanitarium patients, who enjoyed them enough that former patients started requesting supplies to take home. Will Keith recognized the commercial potential, but John Harvey was more interested in health reform than profit. This disagreement would eventually lead to a bitter split between the brothers, lawsuits, and competing cereal companies. The Kellogg Company we know today was Will's creation, built on commercializing what John Harvey intended as therapeutic food. But the Kellogg's weren't alone. A former patient at the Battle Creek Sanitarium named Charles William Post had his own ideas about health foods and commercial opportunities. Post had arrived at the sanitarium suffering from various ailments, including nervous exhaustion. He spent time there learning about John Harvey Kellogg's dietary theories, then left to create his own health food company. In 1897, he introduced grape nuts, a cereal made from wheat and barley that was baked until hard, then ground into small nuggets. Despite containing neither grapes nor nuts, grape nuts became wildly successful. Post was a marketing genius who understood something crucial. He wasn't just selling food, he was selling health claims and lifestyle aspirations. His advertisements promised that grape nuts would cure appendicitis, prevent tuberculosis, strengthen teeth, and improve mental clarity. These claims were completely unfounded, but there were no regulations preventing such advertising. Post's success demonstrated that breakfast cereal could be marketed as medicine, transformation, and modernity, all packaged in a convenient box. The cereal industry exploded in Battle Creek. At one point, there were over 100 cereal companies operating in this small Michigan town, each making various health claims and competing for market share. Most failed, but a few, Kellogg's, Post, and eventually others like Quaker Oats, became massive corporations that would shape American breakfast culture for over a century. Will Keith Kellogg's genius was in understanding that cereal needed to taste good to achieve mass appeal. While his brother John Harvey insisted on bland, unsweetened grains, Will began adding sugar to corn flakes, making them palatable to children and adults who weren't committed health reformers. This practical compromise between health food ideals and consumer preferences became the industry standard. Cereal could claim health benefits while actually tasting appealing. The invention of puff cereals added another dimension. Quaker Oats introduced puffed rice and puffed wheat in 1904 at the St. Louis World's Fair, using a process that shot steam through grain under high pressure, making it expand dramatically. The marketing termed this shooting food from guns, creating a narrative of scientific modernity around breakfast. Breakfast wasn't just food anymore. It was technology, progress, the American way. Cereal companies pioneered many marketing techniques that would become standard across industries. They were among the first to use radio advertising extensively, sponsoring radio programs that would promote their products. They created mascots and characters that became cultural icons. Tony the Tiger, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, the Quaker Oats Man. These weren't just advertising. They were creating emotional relationships between consumers and products, particularly targeting children. The strategy of marketing directly to children revolutionized breakfast and advertising more broadly. Cereal companies recognized that children could influence household purchasing decisions, so they created sweet cereals with cartoon characters and toy prizes specifically designed to appeal to kids. Saturday morning cartoons became vehicles for cereal advertising, creating a cultural moment where American children watched cartoons while eating branded cereals, surrounded by commercial messages encouraging them to ask parents for specific products. The nutritional value of breakfast cereals became increasingly divorced from their marketing claims. While early cereals like shredded wheat and plain corn flakes were relatively simple grain products, competition drove companies to add sugar, artificial flavors, and colorful coatings. By the mid-20th century, some breakfast cereals were essentially cookies in cereal form, containing more sugar than nutrition. Yet the marketing still emphasized health, energy, and starting the day right. Cereal transformed breakfast preparation from cooking to simply pouring. This convenience was revolutionary, particularly for working families and busy mornings. You didn't need to cook porridge, fry eggs, or toast bread. You poured cereal into a bowl, added milk, and breakfast was ready in seconds. This convenience factor, combined with effective marketing, made cereal dominant in American breakfast culture by the mid-20th century. The health food origins of breakfast cereal created lasting associations between cereal and wellness, even as many products became increasingly unhealthy. The presence of added vitamins and minerals required after grain processing removed natural nutrients, allowed companies to market cereals as fortified and healthy. The fine print about sugar content was less emphasized than the large print about containing essential vitamins. Globally, American-style breakfast cereal spread as a marker of modernity and convenience. In countries with strong traditional breakfast cultures, cereal represented Western efficiency and lifestyle. Multinational corporations adapted flavors for local markets while maintaining the basic formula. Processed grains, convenience preparation, health marketing. Breakfast cereal became not just an American phenomenon, but a global one, changing breakfast habits worldwide. The story comes full circle in our current era, where the relationship between cereal and health is being re-examined. High sugar content, overprocessing, misleading marketing. These criticisms have emerged as consumers become more nutrition conscious. Yet cereal remains a breakfast staple, demonstrating how deeply embedded it became in just over a century. The strange journey from John Harvey Kellogg's bland health food to Fruit Loops represents breakfast's transformation from practical fuel to commercial product to cultural phenomenon. There's something almost universal about the egg at breakfast. From Tokyo to Paris, Mexico City to Mumbai, eggs appear on morning tables in countless forms. Scrambled, fried, boiled, poached, baked, stirred into other dishes. This small oval package of protein and fat has become so thoroughly associated with breakfast that breakfast and eggs are nearly synonymous in many cultures. But the egg's journey to breakfast dominance is a story of domestication, commerce, nutrition science, and cultural evolution that spans thousands of years. The relationship between humans and eggs begins with our earliest ancestors raiding wild bird nests. Archaeological evidence suggests humans have been eating bird eggs for at least 6 million years, essentially as long as we've been recognizably human. Early humans were opportunistic omnivores who would eat any calorie source they could safely obtain, and bird eggs provided concentrated nutrition in convenient, portable packages. The challenge was that wild eggs were seasonal, unpredictable, and often defended by aggressive parent birds. Everything changed with the domestication of chickens, which occurred somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago in Southeast Asia. The red jungle fowl, wild ancestors of modern chickens, were gradually tamed and bred for various purposes, including egg production. This domestication meant that for the first time, humans could have reliable access to eggs without hunting for nests or risking angry wild birds. Eggs transformed from occasional wild treat to regular food source. The spread of domesticated chickens followed trade routes and human migrations, reaching the Middle East and Mediterranean by around 800 BCE. Ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated incubation techniques, using specially designed incubation buildings to hatch eggs on a commercial scale. The Romans kept chickens extensively, with eggs appearing in their morning entaculum and throughout their cuisine. Eggs were becoming not just available but abundant, at least for those who could afford to keep chickens or purchase eggs. The egg's nutritional profile made it particularly valuable in pre-modern diets. Eggs provide complete proteins containing all essential amino acids, along with vitamins A, D, E, and B-complex vitamins, plus minerals like iron and zinc. For people whose diets might be limited in variety, eggs provided nutritional diversity in compact form. They could be preserved through various methods: pickling, coating in fat, even burying in ash and salt to create preserved eggs that could last months. The association between eggs and breakfast specifically seems to have emerged from several practical factors. Chickens lay eggs primarily in the morning, so fresh eggs were naturally available at dawn. Eggs cook quickly, making them suitable for the rushed morning meal that became standard after the Industrial Revolution. They're versatile, allowing preparation methods from simple boiling to elaborate omelets depending on time and skill available. And eggs pair well with other breakfast staples like bread and coffee, creating satisfying meal combinations. Different cultures developed distinctive egg breakfast traditions that reflected local tastes and available ingredients. The French refined egg cookery into an art form, with omelets, scrambled eggs, and poached eggs prepared with precise technique. The English developed the full breakfast featuring fried eggs alongside bacon, sausages, and toast. Americans embraced simple preparations like scrambled or fried eggs, eventually creating diner culture where eggs could be ordered dozens of ways. Asian cuisines incorporated eggs into rice dishes, noodle soups, and steamed preparations. The variety of egg preparation methods is staggering when you catalog them all. Boiled eggs alone offer multiple variations depending on cooking time. From soft-boiled with runny yolks to hard-boiled with fully set yolks, each with its advocates and preferred eating methods. Fried eggs can be sunny side up, over easy, over medium, or over hard. Scrambled eggs can range from barely set and creamy to fully cooked and fluffy. Poached eggs require careful technique to achieve that perfect package of set white surrounding liquid yolk. Omelets represent another entire category of egg breakfast, with each culture adding its own interpretations. French omelets are light and folded, often with simple fillings. Spanish tortillas are thick with potatoes, served in wedges. Italian frittatas are hearty and sliceable, packed with vegetables and cheeses. Japanese tamagoyaki rolls thin layers of seasoned egg into elegant rectangles. American diner omelets can be stuffed with seemingly unlimited combinations of meats, cheeses, and vegetables. The commercialization of egg production transformed eggs from small-scale farm products to industrial commodities. The development of factory farming methods in the mid-20th century made eggs incredibly cheap and available year-round. Battery cage systems, where hens are confined in small cages for maximum egg production, became standard despite welfare concerns. This industrialization meant eggs became affordable breakfast staples across economic classes rather than occasional treats or status symbols. Nutritional understanding of eggs has fluctuated dramatically over the past century, creating confusion and controversy. For much of the 20th century, eggs were considered straightforwardly healthy, protein-rich, nutritious, and beneficial. Then cholesterol concerns in the 1970s to 80s led to warnings about egg consumption, with health authorities recommending limiting eggs to reduce dietary cholesterol. More recent research suggests dietary cholesterol has less impact on blood cholesterol than previously thought, rehabilitating eggs' nutritional reputation. These reversals demonstrate how nutrition science evolves and sometimes contradicts itself. The phrase "incredible edible egg" from marketing campaigns captured eggs' position as breakfast staple. The American Egg Board, created in 1976, promoted eggs through clever advertising that emphasized versatility, affordability, and nutrition. These campaigns worked. Eggs remained popular even through cholesterol concerns, demonstrating the strength of their cultural position at breakfast. When people think breakfast, they think eggs, regardless of whether they're currently considered healthy. Egg dishes became markers of culinary skill and cultural identity. The ability to make a proper omelet, to poach an egg with perfect results, or to achieve ideal scrambled eggs became demonstrations of cooking competence. Chefs judged aspiring cooks partly on their egg technique. Countries took pride in their distinctive egg preparations. Eggs became not just food, but cultural expression. Contemporary breakfast culture continues evolving the egg's role. Free-range, organic, and pasture-raised eggs appeal to consumers concerned about animal welfare and food quality. Egg substitutes serve vegans and those with egg allergies. New preparation methods like sous vide eggs or microwave egg cookers offer modern convenience. Yet through all these changes, the basic egg at breakfast remains, fried in a pan, scrambled quickly, or boiled to preference. Some breakfast traditions prove remarkably persistent. The egg's dominance at breakfast represents the intersection of nutrition, convenience, tradition, and commerce. It's familiar comfort food that requires minimal preparation skill while offering room for culinary creativity. It's affordable enough for everyday eating while suitable for special occasion brunches. The simple egg contains multitudes of nutrients, of cultural meanings, of breakfast memories. When you crack an egg into a morning pan, you're participating in a ritual that connects you to thousands of years of human breakfast history. The smell of fresh bread baking, warm toast browning in the toaster, the simple pleasure of butter melting into toasted grains. These sensory experiences connect modern breakfast eaters to the most ancient of human food traditions. Bread has been central to human diets for at least 14,000 years, and its particular association with breakfast reflects both practical considerations and deep cultural significance. The story of bread at breakfast is really the story of agriculture, civilization, and the transformation of wild grasses into the foundation of human sustenance. The journey begins with wild grasses that ancient humans discovered could produce edible seeds. Wheat, barley, oats, rye. These grains were domesticated across different regions as humans transitioned from hunting and gathering to agriculture. The domestication of grains fundamentally changed human society, enabling permanent settlements, population growth, and the development of civilization itself. And once humans had reliable grain supplies, they had reliable breakfast supplies. Early breads were likely simple flatbreads made from ground grain mixed with water and cooked on hot stones or in the embers of fires. These weren't the fluffy risen breads we know today. They were dense, flat, and quite plain. But they were portable, relatively long-lasting, and could be made from stored grain, making them perfect for morning meals when you needed something quick and sustaining before a day of work. The development of leavened bread, using wild yeasts to create risen, lighter bread, occurred in ancient Egypt around 3000 BCE. Egyptian bakers discovered that allowing dough to sit and ferment before baking created bread with better texture and flavor. This fermentation process made nutrients more bioavailable and improved digestibility. Leavened bread became a luxury item, with plain flatbreads remaining the common people's bread, while the wealthy enjoyed risen loaves. Through ancient times and the medieval period, bread remained the foundation of breakfast across social classes. The quality of bread reflected social status. Fine wheat bread for the wealthy, coarse rye or barley bread for peasants, sometimes bread made from beans or chestnuts during grain shortages. Breakfast bread might be dipped in wine, milk, or broth to soften it and add flavor. It might be eaten with cheese, fish, or whatever modest protein sources were available. The significance of bread extended beyond nutrition into deep cultural and religious symbolism. Bread represented life itself, sustenance, the fruits of honest labor. Religious traditions incorporated bread into their most sacred rituals. The Christian Eucharist, the Jewish Challah, the breaking of bread as a sign of community and sharing. This sacred dimension meant that bread at breakfast wasn't just eating. It was participating in patterns of meaning that connected daily life to larger spiritual frameworks. The Industrial Revolution transformed bread production from artisanal craft to industrial process. Roller mills replaced stone mills, producing whiter, more refined flour. Commercial yeast became available, making bread making more reliable and faster. Factory-produced bread became increasingly common in cities, where fewer people had time or facilities for home baking. Bread was becoming standardized, commercialized, separated from its artisanal roots. The invention of sliced bread in 1928 by Otto Frederick Roeder fundamentally changed breakfast culture. Before slicing machines, bread had to be cut by hand, creating uneven slices and requiring skill with a bread knife. Roeder's machine could slice and wrap loaves, creating the perfectly uniform slices we now take for granted. The phrase, "the best thing since sliced bread," emerged because this invention genuinely felt revolutionary. It saved time, reduced waste, and made bread even more convenient for quick breakfast preparation. The toaster developed alongside sliced bread, creating the perfect partnership. Early toasters were simple wire frames that held bread near a heat source, requiring constant attention and frequent turning. Electric toasters, first patented in the early 1900s, automated the process. Pop-up toasters appeared in the 1920s, perfectly timed to work with newly available sliced bread. By mid-century, automatic toasters were standard kitchen appliances, and toast had become a breakfast staple. But what makes toast more appealing than plain bread? The science is surprisingly interesting. Toasting triggers the Maillard reaction, a chemical process where sugars and amino acids in the bread react under heat to create hundreds of new flavor compounds. This creates the characteristic toast taste and aroma that many people find more appealing than soft bread. The crispy texture provides satisfying crunch while the interior remains soft. Toast is essentially bread improved through chemistry and physics. The variety of bread types means toast can take countless forms. White toast, wheat toast, rye toast, sourdough toast, multigrain toast. Each provides different flavors and nutritional profiles. Regional bread traditions mean breakfast toast varies worldwide. Baguette in France, pumpernickel in Germany, focaccia in Italy, brioche for French toast. The type of bread chosen for breakfast toast reflects cultural preferences and available traditions. Toppings and spreads add another dimension to breakfast toast. Butter is the classic, providing fat and richness that complements bread's carbohydrates. Jam, marmalade, and preserves add sweetness and fruit flavors. Nut butters provide protein and different flavor profiles. Some cultures prefer savory toppings: cheese, eggs, avocado, tomatoes, cured meats. The simple toast becomes a platform for infinite variations. Oatmeal and other grain porridges represent another way grains appear at breakfast. Oats, domesticated in Bronze Age Europe, became particularly important in Scotland and Ireland, where they grew well in cool, wet climates. Oatmeal porridge, oats cooked with water or milk until soft, provided sustaining warmth and nutrition for farmers and laborers. The Scottish tradition of oatmeal for breakfast spread through British cultural influence to become standard in many English-speaking countries. The popularity of oats received scientific endorsement when studies in the 1980s to 90s showed that oat fiber could help reduce cholesterol. This health halo made oatmeal trendy again after decades as old-fashioned fare. Instant oatmeal packets provided convenience, while steel-cut oats appealed to those seeking less processed options. Overnight oats, prepared the night before and eaten cold, became popular in the 2000s. The ancient grain porridge kept reinventing itself for modern tastes. Granola represents a modern evolution of grain-based breakfast, invented in the late 19th century as, once again, health food. Original granola was dense, hard, and needed soaking before eating. Modern granola, with oats, nuts, and sweeteners baked until crunchy, emerged in the 1960s counterculture as natural, wholesome food. It's now a mainstream breakfast option despite often containing significant sugar. The health food origins persist in its reputation, even when nutritional reality is more complicated. Bagels, English muffins, croissants, biscuits, muffins. These specialized breads each found niches at breakfast tables. The bagel's journey from Eastern European Jewish communities to American breakfast staple demonstrates how immigrant foods become mainstream. Croissants represent French breakfast culture's influence beyond France. Each bread type brings its own texture, flavor, and cultural associations to breakfast. The modern bread and toast experience would be unrecognizable to ancient grain cultivators, yet the fundamental pattern remains. We still rely on grains for breakfast, still appreciate the combination of carbohydrates and texture that bread provides, still find satisfaction in warm, toasted grains to start our day. The technology has advanced from grinding grain between stones to industrial milling and automated toasters, but the essential appeal of bread at breakfast endures. In our morning toast, we're connected to thousands of years of human breakfast tradition, even if we're just trying to eat something quick before rushing out the door. Somewhere along breakfast's evolution, something unexpected happened. The morning meal became sweet. This might seem natural to us now, accustomed to syrup-drenched pancakes, sugary cereals, and jam-covered toast. But for most of human history, breakfast was decidedly savory, or at least neutral. The sweetening of breakfast represents a relatively recent transformation that reflects changing sugar availability. Evolving taste preferences, commercial interests, and shifting ideas about what meals should provide. The story of sweet breakfast is really the story of how abundance replaced scarcity, and how pleasure became as important as sustenance. For most of history, sugar was rare, expensive, and reserved for the wealthy. Honey provided the primary sweetener, but it too was precious enough that sweetening breakfast would have seemed wasteful. Ancient and medieval breakfasts might include fruit when in season, providing natural sweetness, but deliberate sweetening of morning foods was uncommon. Breakfast was about energy and sustenance, not pleasure or indulgence. Starting the day with sweet foods would have seemed odd, even decadent. The story of breakfast sweetness begins with sugar cane, domesticated in New Guinea around 8000 BCE, and slowly spreading through Southeast Asia, India, and eventually the Middle East. Sugar remained exotic and expensive in Europe, until Caribbean sugar plantations, tragically powered by enslaved labor, made sugar increasingly available and affordable in the 17th and 18th centuries. As sugar prices dropped, sweet foods transitioned from luxury to everyday possibility. By the Victorian era, sugar had become cheap enough that middle-class families could afford to sweeten their morning meals. Jam and marmalade on toast became standard, providing sweetness that would have been unthinkable luxury just generations earlier. The British tradition of marmalade at breakfast allegedly began when Spanish ships carrying Seville oranges sought refuge in Scottish ports during a storm, and a local merchant's wife, Janet Kaler, bought the entire cargo and created orange marmalade. Whether this origin story is accurate or apocryphal, marmalade became thoroughly embedded in British breakfast culture. Pancakes, waffles, and French toast represent another category of sweet breakfast foods with surprisingly ancient roots. Pancakes in various forms appear across cultures. Ancient Greeks ate pancakes called tagnites. Romans had alita dolcia similar to crepes. Medieval Europeans made pancakes during Shrovetide before Lenten fasting. But these early pancakes weren't necessarily sweet breakfast foods. They might be savory or plain, eaten at any meal. The association of pancakes specifically with sweet breakfast emerged more recently. American breakfast culture particularly embraced pancakes and waffles as sweet morning foods. Pancakes became common frontier food, simple to make with basic ingredients, filling, and adaptable to whatever additions were available. The introduction of commercial pancake mixes in the late 19th century made them even more accessible. Aunt Jemima pancake mix, first marketed in 1889, was one of the first ready-made food mixes, revolutionizing convenience cooking while also, problematically, relying on racist imagery that persisted for over a century. Waffles followed a similar trajectory, from European medieval origins to American breakfast staple. The waffle iron created distinctive grid patterns that held pools of butter and syrup, making waffles particularly suitable for sweet toppings. Belgian waffles, introduced at the 1964 New York World's Fair, became popular in America, adding to the variety of sweet breakfast griddle cakes available. The development of pancake syrups represents its own interesting story. Pure maple syrup, made from maple tree sap, was produced by indigenous peoples in northeastern North America long before European contact. The labor-intensive process of tapping trees, collecting sap, and boiling it down to concentrate the sugars meant maple syrup remained relatively expensive. Commercial pancake syrups, made primarily from corn syrup with maple flavoring, provided cheaper alternatives that allowed regular sweet pancake breakfasts for families who couldn't afford pure maple syrup. French toast, bread soaked in egg mixture and fried, appears in Roman cookbooks under the name pan dulcis. Medieval European versions were called lost bread, useful for using stale bread that might otherwise be wasted. The sweetening of French toast, with the addition of sugar or cinnamon to the egg mixture and sweet toppings after cooking, transformed it from practical recycling of old bread to deliberate breakfast indulgence. Pastries at breakfast represent European influence, particularly French bakery culture. Croissants, pain au chocolat, Danish pastries. These rich, sweet baked goods became breakfast items through cultural tradition. The French breakfast of coffee and croissant represents a completely different breakfast philosophy than protein-heavy Anglo-American breakfasts, prioritizing pleasure and quality over quantity and sustenance. Donuts at breakfast emerged from Dutch and German immigration to America. The Pennsylvania Dutch made olicoques, oil cakes, fried dough balls that were ancestors of modern donuts. The ring shape reportedly appeared in the mid-19th century, possibly to ensure even cooking or possibly to use less dough during grain shortages. Donuts became particularly associated with breakfast through coffee and donut shop culture, with dunking donuts in morning coffee becoming an American ritual. The commercialization of sweet breakfast reached its peak with breakfast cereals, discussed earlier, but also with breakfast pastries and bakery goods. Pop-Tarts, introduced in 1964, represented the extreme endpoint of convenient sweet breakfast. A handheld pastry that could be eaten without plates or utensils, required no preparation beyond optional toasting, and provided intense sweetness and flavor in a portable form. Nutritionists might have concerns, but Pop-Tarts were undeniably convenient for rushed mornings. The health implications of sweet breakfasts have become increasingly debated as understanding of nutrition evolved. High sugar consumption at breakfast causes rapid blood sugar spikes followed by crashes, potentially affecting energy levels and concentration throughout the morning. The fiber, protein, and fat that slow sugar absorption are often minimal in sweet breakfast foods. Yet sweet breakfasts persist in popularity despite these concerns, suggesting that taste preferences and cultural habits outweigh nutritional considerations for many people. Recent decades have seen attempts to rehabilitate sweet breakfast as healthy. Natural sweeteners like honey and maple syrup replace refined sugar in health-conscious recipes. Whole grain pancakes and waffles provide more fiber than refined flour versions. Fruit-based sweetness appears in smoothie bowls and topped yogurt. These modifications attempt to preserve the pleasure of sweet breakfast while addressing nutritional concerns, trying to have both indulgence and health in the same morning bowl. The geography of sweet versus savory breakfast reveals interesting cultural patterns. American breakfast tends toward sweet: pancakes, waffles, sweet cereals, pastries. British breakfast lines savory: eggs, bacon, beans, mushrooms. Continental European breakfast split the difference: coffee with croissant or bread with jam. Asian breakfasts are typically savory: rice, noodles, vegetables, proteins. These patterns reflect deeper cultural attitudes about morning meals and appropriate start-of-day foods. What's remarkable about breakfast sweetness is how recent and culturally specific it is. For most of human history and across most cultures, breakfast was savory or neutral. The sweet breakfast is largely a modern Western phenomenon, made possible by cheap sugar and shaped by commercial food industries. Yet it has become so normalized in some cultures that sweet breakfast seems natural, inevitable, the obvious way to start the day. We forget that pancakes with syrup, frosted flakes, and glazed donuts represent a historically unusual approach to morning eating. Delicious, perhaps, but far from universal or ancient. American breakfast culture deserves its own chapter, not because American breakfast is inherently superior or more important than other breakfast traditions, but because American breakfast has become perhaps the most globally influential breakfast style, exported worldwide through fast food chains, hotels, and cultural soft power. The American breakfast has become a recognizable category internationally, representing a specific approach to morning eating that combines abundance, convenience, and particular flavor profiles. Understanding American breakfast helps us understand how local food traditions can become global phenomena. The foundations of American breakfast lie in British colonial foodways, but transformed by the abundance of the New World and the mixing of multiple cultural traditions. Early American colonists ate similar breakfasts to their British counterparts: bread, porridge, maybe some leftover meat or cheese. But the vast forests provided game, waters teemed with fish, and farmland produced abundant crops. Scarcity, which defined European eating, was replaced by relative plenty, at least for colonizers with access to land and resources. Native American food traditions influenced American breakfast in ways often unacknowledged. Corn, unknown in Europe before contact, became an American breakfast staple in forms like cornmeal mush, Johnny cakes, and eventually grits in the South. Maple syrup, as mentioned earlier, came from indigenous peoples' knowledge of tapping maple trees. Pumpkin and squash appeared in breakfast breads and dishes. American breakfast developed as a hybrid, combining European structures with indigenous ingredients and techniques. The distinctly American tradition of hearty, protein-heavy breakfasts emerged partly from frontier conditions and agricultural labor. Farmers and workers needed substantial calories for physical labor, and breakfast became the largest meal for many families. Eggs, bacon, sausage, biscuits with gravy, fried potatoes. These calorie-dense foods provided energy for long workdays. The breakfast we might now consider excessive was practical necessity for people doing hard physical labor. Regional variations in American breakfast reflect the country's geography and cultural diversity. Southern breakfast traditions include grits, biscuits and gravy, country ham, and red-eye gravy. The Southwest contributes breakfast burritos, huevos rancheros, and chilaquiles. New England offers corned beef hash and Boston brown bread. These regional specialties demonstrate that American breakfast isn't monolithic, but rather a collection of regional traditions under one national umbrella. The American diner became the iconic space for American breakfast culture in the 20th century. These small restaurants, often built from prefabricated structures resembling railroad dining cars, served as community gathering places and democratic eating spaces where people from all social classes could eat side by side. Diner breakfast menus offered extensive choices. Eggs cooked every possible way, multiple meat options, pancakes or waffles, toast or biscuits, endless combinations all served quickly and affordably. Diner culture created breakfast terminology and practices that spread beyond diners themselves. Over easy, sunny side up, hash browns scattered, smothered, and covered. These ordering specifications allowed customization and created shared language around breakfast preferences. The omnipresent coffee refills, the breakfast available all day, the counter seating where solo diners could eat without feeling alone. These diner features shaped American breakfast expectations. Fast food chains industrialized and globalized American breakfast starting in the mid-20th century. McDonald's introduced the Egg McMuffin in 1972, creating a portable, standardized breakfast sandwich that could be eaten on the go. This innovation extended fast food's business into breakfast hours while creating a new category of convenience breakfast. Other chains followed with their own breakfast offerings, and breakfast sandwiches became ubiquitous in American culture. The breakfast sandwich, eggs, meat, and cheese on some form of bread or biscuit, represents American breakfast efficiency taken to its logical conclusion. It's portable, requiring no utensils or plate. It combines protein, carbohydrates, and fat in proportions designed to be filling. It can be eaten while commuting or at a desk. The breakfast sandwich prioritizes convenience and functionality over the leisurely, communal breakfast eating that characterized earlier eras. Brunch emerged as a distinctly American elaboration of breakfast culture, though it has British origins. Brunch, a portmanteau of breakfast and lunch, typically occurs on weekend late mornings and features both breakfast and lunch foods, often with alcoholic beverages like mimosas or Bloody Marys. Brunch became a social occasion, a leisurely meal that contrasts with rushed weekday breakfasts. The brunch culture of the late 20th and early 21st centuries represents breakfast transformed into entertainment and social performance. American breakfast cereals, discussed earlier, represent another major American breakfast export. The industrial approach to breakfast that created cereal companies spread globally, with American brands becoming available worldwide and local companies creating similar products. The model of convenient, shelf-stable, quick breakfast that requires minimal preparation spread far beyond American borders. The health implications of traditional American breakfast have come under increasing scrutiny. High in calories, saturated fat, and often sodium, the classic American breakfast of eggs, bacon, sausage, hash browns, and buttered toast might provide excessive calories for people with sedentary modern jobs. The breakfast that made sense for farmers doing physical labor all day becomes problematic for office workers who sit most of the day. This has led to evolving American breakfast patterns, with some people choosing lighter options or skipping breakfast entirely. Yet the American breakfast persists in cultural imagination as a symbol of abundance, choice, and hospitality. Hotels worldwide offer American breakfast as a category, signaling a substantial meal with eggs, meat, and bread products. American breakfast foods appear on menus globally, adapted to local tastes, but recognizable as American in origin. The global spread of American breakfast represents both genuine appeal and American cultural influence. Contemporary American breakfast culture shows increasing diversity and health consciousness. Smoothie bowls, avocado toast, breakfast grain bowls. These trendy breakfast items reflect concerns about nutrition and wellness, while maintaining the American emphasis on substantial morning meals. Simultaneously, traditional American breakfast foods remain popular, suggesting that American breakfast culture can accommodate both innovation and tradition. The criticism of American breakfast as excessive, unhealthy, or environmentally unsustainable has validity, particularly regarding industrial meat production and highly processed breakfast cereals. Yet American breakfast also represents democratic accessibility. The diner where anyone can afford to eat, the fast food breakfast available at low prices, the abundance that makes breakfast a guaranteed rather than uncertain meal. Understanding American breakfast requires acknowledging both its problems and its appeals, both its cultural significance and its health implications. While American breakfast culture has spread globally, the world's breakfast diversity remains rich and fascinating. From Japanese breakfast with multiple small dishes to Mexican breakfast featuring spicy, complex flavors, from Middle Eastern spreads with numerous salads and breads to Scandinavian breakfast tables with fish and cheese. Morning meals around the world reflect local ingredients, cultural values, and distinctive approaches to starting the day. Exploring global breakfast traditions reveals that there's no universal right way to break one's fast, only the ways that work within specific cultural contexts. The Japanese breakfast, or asagohan, represents one of the most distinctive approaches to morning eating. Traditional Japanese breakfast resembles a miniaturized version of lunch or dinner rather than a separate category of foods. It might include steamed rice, miso soup, grilled fish, pickled vegetables, nari seaweed, natto fermented soybeans, and tamagaki rolled omelet. This isn't a quick meal but a balanced, carefully composed set of dishes that provide varied nutrients and flavors. The philosophy behind Japanese breakfast differs fundamentally from Western approaches. Rather than quick fuel before rushing to work, traditional Japanese breakfast is about mindful eating, balanced nutrition, and starting the day with intention. The multiple small dishes encourage slow eating and appreciation of different tastes and textures. While modern Japanese breakfast has simplified for many people, often just rice, miso soup, and perhaps one or two other items. The traditional approach reveals a culture that takes morning eating seriously as a health and wellness practice. Chinese breakfast varies enormously by region, reflecting the country's vast size and regional diversity. In northern regions, breakfast might include steamed buns, baozi, fried dough sticks, yusheo, dipped in soy milk or wheat noodles. Southern regions favor rice porridge, congee, with various toppings, rice noodle dishes, or dim sum. Salty, savory flavors predominate, with many breakfast foods incorporating vegetables, proteins, and complex flavors from the start of the day. Street food culture plays a significant role in Chinese breakfast. Breakfast vendors set up early in the morning, offering hot, fresh foods that people purchase on the way to work or school. This creates a social, communal breakfast culture quite different from American home or fast food breakfast. The breakfast street food culture demonstrates how breakfast can be both convenient and freshly prepared, both social and efficient. Indian breakfast varies dramatically by region, reflecting the subcontinent's linguistic, religious, and cultural diversity. South Indian breakfast features dishes like idli, steamed rice cakes, dosa, crispy fermented crepes, and upma, savory semolina porridge, often served with sambar, lentil-based vegetable stew, and chutneys. North Indian breakfast might include parathas, stuffed flatbreads, puri, fried bread, or aloo sabzi, potato curry. These breakfasts are substantial, flavorful, and often spicy by Western standards. The use of fermented batters for idli and dosa reveals sophisticated food technology that improves nutrition and digestibility. The fermentation process increases B vitamins and makes nutrients more bioavailable. These traditional preparations demonstrate that pre-modern cultures developed advanced food processing techniques that modern science now recognizes as nutritionally superior to many industrial food processes. Middle Eastern and North African breakfast, often called breakfast meze, features numerous small dishes spread across the table. This might include flatbreads, lebne, strained yogurt, za'atar spice blend, olives, cheese, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggs prepared various ways, hummus, and falafel. The emphasis is on variety, freshness, and sharing. This breakfast style encourages lingering, conversation, and community rather than individual, rushed eating. Turkish breakfast takes the meze approach to elaborate heights. A traditional Turkish breakfast might include multiple types of cheese, olives, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggs, simit, sesame bread rings, honey, jams, kaymak, clotted cream, and numerous small dishes. This isn't a meal to be rushed. It's an occasion for family gathering and leisurely morning socializing. The Turkish breakfast demonstrates breakfast as social ritual rather than mere refueling. Latin American breakfast varies by country, but often features heartier, more complex flavors than continental European breakfasts. Mexican breakfast might include chilaquiles, fried tortilla strips in salsa, huevos rancheros, eggs with salsa on tortillas, or tamales. Brazilian breakfast features fresh fruits, cheese bread, and coffee. These breakfasts reflect both indigenous ingredients and European colonial influences, creating unique hybrid breakfast cultures. The concept of continental breakfast in hotel contexts usually refers to a light European-style breakfast. Breads, butter, jam, coffee, maybe some cheese and cold cuts. This originated as the typical breakfast in continental Europe, as opposed to the heartier, full English breakfast. The irony is that actual continental European breakfasts vary widely, from sparse French coffee and croissant to elaborate German or Dutch breakfast spreads, making continental breakfast somewhat misleading as a category. African breakfast traditions vary enormously across the continent, but often feature grain porridges made from millet, sorghum, maize, or other local grains. In North Africa, breakfast might resemble Middle Eastern breakfasts with bread, olives, and spreads. In East Africa, mandazi, fried dough, or chapati might accompany tea. West African breakfast might include akara, fried bean cakes, or ogi, fermented cereal pudding. These breakfasts reflect indigenous grains and cooking methods, demonstrating breakfast traditions that developed independently of Western influence. Scandinavian breakfast tables traditionally feature an impressive spread called frukostbord in Sweden. This might include multiple types of bread, particularly dark, hearty rye breads, various cheeses, cured and smoked fish, cold cuts, soft-boiled eggs, yogurt, and lingonberry jam. The Scandinavian emphasis on hearty breakfast reflects cold climates, where substantial morning fuel helped people stay warm and energized through long, dark winter days. Filipino breakfast often features silog dishes, combinations of sinangag, garlic fried rice, itlog egg, and various proteins like tocino, sweet cured pork, tapa, cured beef, or longanisa, sweet sausage. These substantial, flavorful breakfasts reflect both Asian rice culture and Spanish colonial influences, creating distinctive Filipino morning eating traditions. What these global breakfast traditions reveal is that breakfast is profoundly cultural rather than naturally determined. There's no biological imperative to eat sweet versus savory, hot versus cold, simple versus complex at breakfast. These patterns reflect available ingredients, climate considerations, work patterns, religious influences, and cultural values about morning meals and proper ways to start the day. The foods that seem like obvious breakfast choices in one culture might seem strange or inappropriate in another. The global spread of Western breakfast styles, particularly American fast food breakfast, raises questions about cultural imperialism and dietary change. When breakfast cereals and breakfast sandwiches appear on menus in Japan, India, or Mexico, are these welcomed additions to breakfast options or threats to traditional morning eating cultures? The answer likely varies by individual and context, with some appreciating convenient new options, while others lament the loss of traditional breakfast practices. Yet traditional breakfast cultures prove remarkably resilient. Even as Western breakfast options become available globally, traditional breakfasts persist, often adapting to modern constraints while maintaining essential character. Japanese convenience stores sell onigiri rice balls as quick breakfast options that maintain Japanese breakfast flavors in portable form. Mexican breakfast tacos bring traditional breakfast flavors into fast food formats. Global breakfast culture increasingly features hybridity. Traditional and modern, local and global, existing alongside each other rather than one replacing the other entirely. We've journeyed through thousands of years of breakfast history, explored breakfast foods and traditions, and now we arrive at the contemporary questions that spark genuine debate. Is breakfast actually the most important meal of the day? Should we eat breakfast at all? What does science actually say about morning meals? These questions have become surprisingly contentious, with passionate advocates on multiple sides citing conflicting research and drawing opposite conclusions from similar evidence. The science of breakfast reveals a complex, nuanced picture that resists simple answers, which makes it perfect for exploration as we drift toward sleep. Let's start with that phrase we've all heard countless times: breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Where did this come from? The answer is less scientific and more commercial than you might expect. The phrase was popularized by American breakfast cereal companies in the early 20th century, particularly by John Harvey Kellogg and later by marketing campaigns for various cereal brands. It wasn't based on rigorous nutritional research. It was advertising meant to sell breakfast products by creating anxiety about skipping breakfast. This doesn't mean breakfast isn't important, but it does mean we should examine the claim critically rather than accepting it as established fact. The marketing worked so effectively that the phrase became common wisdom, repeated by parents, doctors, and nutritionists with the authority of settled science, when it was actually commercial messaging that had been laundered into cultural truth through repetition. So what does actual scientific research tell us about breakfast? The answer is complicated. Some studies show correlations between eating breakfast and positive health outcomes like healthy weight, better concentration, improved nutrient intake, and reduced risk of metabolic diseases. Other studies find no significant benefits from breakfast, and some research suggests that breakfast might not be necessary for everyone. The conflicting findings reflect the complexity of nutrition research and the difficulty of isolating single factors in something as multifaceted as human health. One challenge in breakfast research is distinguishing correlation from causation. Many studies show that people who eat breakfast regularly have lower rates of obesity than people who skip breakfast. This correlation has been widely cited as evidence that breakfast prevents weight gain, but correlation doesn't prove causation. It's possible that people who eat breakfast are also people who have other healthy habits, regular schedules, and resources for healthy food. The breakfast might not be causing the healthy weight. Both might result from other underlying factors. More rigorous research using randomized controlled trials, where researchers assign people to eat or skip breakfast and track outcomes, has produced mixed results. Some studies show metabolic benefits from eating breakfast, while others show no significant differences in weight loss or metabolic health between breakfast eaters and breakfast skippers. The inconsistent findings suggest that breakfast's effects might vary by individual factors like genetics, activity level, and overall diet quality, rather than being universally positive or negative. The physiology of overnight fasting and morning eating provides some insights. During sleep, your body has been fasting for 8 to 12 hours. Blood glucose levels drop overnight, though the body maintains them through gluconeogenesis, the production of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources like proteins and fats. When you wake, your body needs to replenish energy stores, but the urgency of this need varies by individual and circumstance. Eating breakfast causes blood glucose to rise, triggering insulin release that allows cells to absorb glucose for energy. For people with diabetes or insulin resistance, managing these blood sugar swings is important for health. For metabolically healthy people, the body handles these fluctuations efficiently. The timing and composition of breakfast can affect how blood sugar responds. Protein and fiber slow glucose absorption, while simple carbohydrates cause rapid spikes and subsequent crashes. The concept of metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to efficiently switch between burning carbohydrates and fats for fuel, plays a role in how people respond to breakfast or its absence. People with good metabolic flexibility can comfortably skip breakfast, burning stored fats for energy until they eat. People with impaired metabolic flexibility might feel genuinely awful skipping breakfast, experiencing low energy, difficulty concentrating, and intense hunger. This suggests breakfast needs might be individual rather than universal. Circadian rhythms, the body's internal 24-hour cycles, influence how we process nutrients at different times of day. Research shows that insulin sensitivity tends to be higher earlier in the day, meaning that the body may process carbohydrates more efficiently at breakfast than at dinner. Some studies suggest that front-loading calories, eating larger meals earlier in the day, might support metabolic health better than eating heavy meals late. This provides some support for making breakfast a substantial meal if you're eating it at all. The emerging field of chronobiology suggests that when you eat might be as important as what you eat. Time-restricted eating, limiting eating to a specific window of hours each day, has shown health benefits in some research, possibly by aligning eating patterns with circadian rhythms and allowing extended fasting periods that may promote cellular repair processes. Some forms of time-restricted eating include breakfast, while others skip it, suggesting that the timing window matters more than including or excluding breakfast specifically. Cognitive performance research has examined how breakfast affects mental functioning. Some studies show that eating breakfast improves concentration, memory, and mood, particularly in children and adolescents. The thinking is that morning glucose intake fuels the brain, which uses glucose as its primary energy source. However, other research finds no significant cognitive differences between breakfast eaters and skippers in healthy adults. The benefits might be most pronounced in people who are genuinely hungry or have low energy when skipping breakfast. The breakfast skipping phenomenon called intermittent fasting has gained popularity as a weight management and health optimization strategy. Intermittent fasting typically involves daily fasting windows of 14 to 18 hours, which usually means skipping breakfast. Some research suggests intermittent fasting can aid weight loss, improve insulin sensitivity, and promote cellular repair processes called autophagy. However, these benefits might come from calorie restriction and extended fasting periods rather than from skipping breakfast specifically. The individual variation in breakfast needs cannot be overstated. Some people genuinely function better eating breakfast. They have better energy, mood, and cognitive performance. Others feel fine or even better skipping breakfast, experiencing no negative effects from morning fasting. These differences likely reflect genetics, metabolism, activity patterns, sleep quality, stress levels, and overall diet quality. The mistake is assuming that what works for one person should work for everyone. Children and adolescents represent a special case where breakfast appears more consistently beneficial. School breakfast programs have demonstrated improvements in academic performance, attendance, and behavior among students who receive breakfast at school. Growing bodies and brains have higher nutrient needs, and children may be more vulnerable to the cognitive effects of morning hunger. The evidence for breakfast benefits appears stronger for young people than for adults. The composition of breakfast matters as much as whether to eat it. A breakfast of refined carbohydrates and added sugars, like sweetened cereal or pastries, causes blood sugar spikes and crashes that can leave people feeling worse than if they'd skipped breakfast entirely. A breakfast with protein, healthy fats, and fiber, like eggs with vegetables or oatmeal with nuts, provides steadier energy. The breakfast is important message becomes more accurate when qualified as a balanced breakfast is important for those who eat breakfast. Cultural and social aspects of breakfast influence individual experiences in ways that pure nutrition science doesn't capture. For many people, breakfast is a social ritual with family, a moment of calm before busy days, or a beloved habit that structures their mornings. These psychosocial benefits are real even if they're not captured in metabolic studies. Similarly, some people feel liberated by skipping breakfast, enjoying the simplicity and time saved. Both experiences are valid. The conclusion that emerges from reviewing breakfast science is unsatisfying for those wanting clear directives. It depends. Whether you should eat breakfast depends on your individual physiology, your lifestyle, your health goals, whether you feel better eating or not eating it, and whether breakfast is a meaningful ritual for you or an unnecessary obligation. The most important meal of the day claim is marketing hyperbole, but that doesn't mean breakfast is useless. Just that its importance varies by person and circumstance. Perhaps the most useful approach is to experiment and observe. Try eating breakfast for several weeks, noting energy levels, mood, hunger throughout the day, and how you feel. Then try skipping breakfast for several weeks, noting the same factors. The results of this personal experiment will tell you more about what works for your body than any general study of average effects across populations. Trust your own experience over cultural messaging about what you should do regarding breakfast. What we can say with confidence is that if you eat breakfast, its quality matters. Processed sugars and refined carbohydrates aren't optimized for stable energy and satiety. Protein, healthy fats, and fiber provide better breakfast nutrition. But the timing, whether to eat soon after waking or hours later or not until midday, is more individually variable than cultural messaging suggests. Breakfast is neither essential for everyone nor useless for everyone. It's a meal that can be beneficial when approached thoughtfully and skipped without harm when that better serves individual needs. As we've journeyed together through thousands of years of breakfast history, we've discovered that this seemingly simple morning meal carries extraordinary complexity. From our earliest ancestors eating whatever they could find at dawn to medieval monks struggling with the morality of morning eating. From the Industrial Revolution's transformation of breakfast into scheduled necessity to the cereal wars that turned breakfast into big business. From the chemistry of toast to the global diversity of morning meals, breakfast reveals itself as far more than just food. It's a window into human history, culture, commerce, and our ongoing attempts to understand what our bodies need and what our rituals mean. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the fascinating history of breakfast. If you're already drifting off, then our mission is complete. But if you're still awake, perhaps another deep dive through one of our previous episodes will carry you gently into slumber. Until we meet again in these quiet hours, may the smell of morning coffee bring you peace. May your first bite of the day taste like possibility. And may you begin each morning knowing that breakfast, in whatever form it takes, is your choice, your ritual, your own small way of welcoming a new day.